In today's step-by-step walkthrough, I will be using Jamovi version 2.6.44 to perform, interpret, and write up a bivariate correlation. I recommend downloading today's dataset before we begin. You can also access this resource in the Psychology Resource Library. Here we have our dataset within Jamovi. We can see here that each row corresponds to a single participant within our dataset. We have age and gender, but we won't be considering these demographic variables in our analysis today. We're interested in these 4 variables. This variable is from the Hong Trait Psychological Reactance Scale, and this concept refers to a dislike or a disdain for rules or regulations that are thought to limit or threaten personal freedoms. And higher scores on the scale indicate greater psychological reactance. The remaining 3 variables here are subscales on the general attitudes towards institutional authority scale, and this scale assesses support or attitudes towards police, law, and military respectively, and higher scores indicate greater support. Unlike SPSS, Jamovi does not allow us to toggle between pairwise and listwise deletion as different ways of managing missing data. The default setting is pairwise deletion. If you instead wanted to use listwise deletion as your approach, this would require some additional coding, which we won't be covering today. Looking at our variables of interest today, you'll notice that we don't have any missing data, and therefore we don't have to be overly concerned with managing missing data in this example. To run our correlation analysis, we're on the Analyses tab, we click Regression, Correlation Matrix. We can then simultaneously move our 4 variables of interest into the box, ensure that Pearson is selected within correlation coefficients. We also want to select N so we can get the sample size for each of our comparisons, the confidence intervals, and ensure that is set to 95%. You can see that we automatically get our output within this right-hand window. If we just wanted to isolate a single comparison to interpret today, we could look at support for police and support for military. So here we have a Pearson's R value of 0.59. The absence of a sign here tells us that it's positive. So we can either have a positive or a negative sign when we're looking at our correlation coefficient. And then we also have a numerical value, and we consider these each separately when interpreting our correlation analysis. The sign in this example tells us that as support for police or more positive attitudes towards police increases, so do attitudes towards military. If there were a negative sign before this numerical value, we would interpret it as support for police increases, support for military personnel decreases, or conversely, as support for police decreases, support for military personnel increases. So just a reminder, in this example, both of our variables are moving in the positive direction. In other words, scores increase on one variable as scores increase on the other variable. So once we've considered the direction of the relationship as indicated by the sign, we then go on to the numerical value, and this tells us about the strength or the magnitude of the relationship. Using Cohen's conventions, we could consider this a strong relationship. We can also calculate the coefficient of determination. We do this by multiplying the Pearson's R value for the specific comparison that we're looking at by itself, and then multiplying it by 100 in order to get a percentage. For this specific example, it would mean that we have 34.81% shared variance between our 2 variables, and this is just another way of looking at the strength of the relationship. When looking at the p-value, we can see that there is a statistically significant relationship or association between these 2 variables. And when we consider the upper and lower confidence interval, this tells us that the true population correlation coefficient lies between 0.69 and 0.47. So additional output that you might want to look at is here looking at a plot. If you just scroll down, here we can see the relationship between those variables on plots. You can also go here and select syntax mode. And this will give you the syntax for your specific analysis. You can then save that syntax and rerun it at a later stage without having to click through as we did previously. The write-up for this analysis could be written as follows. There was a statistically significant, strong positive bivariate correlation between attitudes towards the police and attitudes towards the military. You could then also add, such that as positive attitudes towards police increased, so did positive attitudes towards the military. When we think about the values that we want to include in this write-up, we have the degrees of freedom in brackets. We include the Pearson's R value, as well as the p-value, and the upper and lower confidence interval. You can access the full suite of resources in the Psychology Resource Library. Follow our YouTube channel for more walkthrough videos like this one.